Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ronald Crutcher, President of the University of Richmond. I am so delighted to welcome you to this special panel about the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the arts and their role in society as part of this 2021 Menuhin competition here in Richmond, Virginia. Now, this is really a fitting topic for a competition named in honor of Yehudi Menuhin. Menuhin devoted much of his life to teaching music, forging links between cultures, and bringing classical music to those who may not have had access to it, especially the most disadvantaged. He was convinced that music could be a powerful social bond. Hence, at the Menuhin competition, the young violinists, in addition to performing, are afforded opportunities to develop social and cultural connections in addition to their musical development. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are topics that I've been contemplating and writing about for many years now. In the 1990s, while I was serving first as the Vice President for Academic Affairs and the Dean at the Cleveland Orchestra at the Cleveland Institute of Music, and then the Director of the Butler School of Music at the University of Texas, I wrote several articles, participated in panels, and gave numerous speeches about the need for arts organizations to embrace the growing diversity of our country. I was particularly troubled by the fact that in those days, the primary method of connecting to a broader community was through what was termed outreach, a term that I really did not like. This is a term which I particularly took umbrage with since it implied, at least to me, unilateral interaction. A better term, I asserted in one of my articles, would be to call it community connection or community engagement. To some extent, it saddens me that we've not made more progress in making artistic excellence inclusive to the extent that our audiences and our performers, artists, mirror the population. However, we have with us on the panel today 5 artist leaders who have not fallen into the trap of thinking that there is, quote, a single story or one exclusive approach to presenting the arts and educating future artists. It gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce our panel to you. I will simply introduce them by name and title and leave it to them to provide more information about their organization and their artistic activities. They are Jennifer Arnold, Director of Artistic Planning and Orchestral Operations for the Richmond Symphony; Aaron Dworkin, Professor of Arts Leadership and Entrepreneurship and former Dean of the University of Michigan's School of Music, Theater, and Dance; Alex Nyerges, Director of the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts; Wesley Taylor, Assistant Professor in the Art Foundation Program and a Professor of Graphic Design at Virginia Commonwealth University; and Stoner Winslett, Founding Artistic Director of the Richmond Ballet Professional Company. I'd like to ask each panelist to begin with to address how they've approached their work in such a way as to be more inclusive of people, artists, composers, dancers, writers, etc., from a broad variety of backgrounds, experiences, and cultural perspectives. We'll begin with Aaron Dworkin, and we'll get into our discussion. So Aaron, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, President Crutcher. And it's just an honor to be part of such an extraordinary panel and group of leaders in our field. So, you know, it's interesting, for a significant part of my life, I had founded the Sphinx Organization, and which is an organization dedicated to transforming lives through the power of diversity in the arts. And so all of my work in that capacity was fixated on issues surrounding DE&I. And it was interesting because I would sometimes talk with those, you know, who were leading just orchestras or music schools, conservatories, et cetera. And they said, well, it's easy for you. That's the focus of your organization. But, you know, I've got a host of priorities, so I can't really focus on diversity the way that you do. And then I was able to transition to some other roles. And so I think I'm able to at least bring a little bit of both of those perspectives. And for the Sphinx Organization, you know, it was, how can we really achieve this mission, right? How can we increase the representation on stage, behind the stage, on the podium, the works that are performed, et cetera, across all of these different areas? And I would say one of the big things that I wanted to kind of share, and I'd say lessons learned from those experiences in almost 20 years leading that organization was collaboration. I learned very early on that there is no one organization that can bring about the type of systemic change that actually really affects an entire field, a discipline, or our society. And so Sphinx was really built on partnerships with orchestras, with music schools, with service organizations, et cetera. And so I think when we think about this work, it's critically important to see how are we going to do it with others? How are we going to partner? How are we going to build on the skill sets that other organizations might have to be able to build collaborative achievement? And then as I switched to the kind of aspect of serving as dean, and now in my capacity as a professor of arts leadership and entrepreneurship, there is, I think, a sense sometimes on leaders of color, you come into a traditional position and you don't want to be seen as the Black so-and-so, right? Oh, this is our Black dean, so everything they're going to do is Black, right? It's all about Black people now or whatever. And so it's odd because there almost is something within you that's like, oh, I have to make sure I don't have my diversity stuff be too present, which of course is terrible and ridiculous, but is important to understand if you're going to be effective. And so I think one of the things coming in at the School of Music, Theater, and Dance at Michigan was the idea, again, of making sure of understanding, as dean, I can't really build any long-term sustainable change, right? It's got to be, the faculty has to be on board, our staff have to be on board, it has to be able to serve and have impact on our students. If it is not serving all of those things, and if especially faculty are not behind the work that you're doing, it simply will not be sustainable. So the way you communicate about the importance of diversity, why does this matter? Why does this issue, say, of a lack of Black faculty matter to older white male faculty? Because it does, it should, but you have to make that case, you have to make that argument, you have to explain the history. And I think sometimes we can run afoul if we just expect everyone to know and understand and value these issues of diversity. It is incumbent upon us to explain them. And then probably the last thing that I'll share is that one of the things that I also try to do in, say, my work is with teaching entrepreneurship is, say, with my entrepreneurship book, it's not a book about diversity. My class on arts leaders is not a class about diverse leaders, yet the majority of those who are the case studies in the book are people of color or women, and the majority of leaders who I bring in from my class are people of color or women. So in other words, building diversity into the essence of what we're doing, even though the focus is not diversity, is important. And I think comes back to our whole theme for this session. And of course, coming out of Chimamanda Adichie's, famous quote about the danger of a single story, which is not that it's untrue, but that it's incomplete. And so these stories we are weaving in the arts are still absolutely incomplete. And we have the responsibility to develop that so that we can be more true to our art form and to our communities.
Thank you so much, Aaron. Jen, let's hear from you next.
Well, thank you for inviting me to this panel and hopefully representing the Richmond Symphony very well. For me, I'm going to speak briefly about myself first and then talk about the Richmond Symphony and what some of the things we're doing. For me, I have to say one of the big things is that allows me to help program and think about including broad perspectives is the fact that I am always educating. So I think it's really important for me just as a planner just to really be aware of what's happening in the world, constantly reading and getting to know other cultures, traveling, doing those things. So I think that's, for me, just personally, that's the first step. And making sure I'm aware of what's happening so that when we produce something on stage, I'm comfortable having these conversations with people about why the work is important. The second thing I was going to say about the Richmond Symphony. So one thing that I've learned is to question everything. I think I'm very comfortable being someone who questions everything. So that's one thing that really I don't mind doing. But I think it's just looking at everything with a fresh lens. What are we putting on stage? Who are we putting on stage? Why are we putting them on stage? It's very important to ask why and not to make people feel tokenized. Why don't people want to come to a concert? What is the concert really saying? How does our marketing materials, everything, so we question everything here. And that's one wonderful thing about working here at the Richmond Symphony. People aren't afraid to ask, why are we doing this? So I would say question everything. The other thing is, of course, access, which everyone talks about. Creating access in different ways. And I think one thing that in the classical music world, I will say that people kind of suffer from is from perfectionist kind of ideals. So if you try something, people are worried to try something because they're like, we're going to fail, but I'm much more of like, let's try it because, we could get one person or people who may never have come before. And this is their first symphony experience or something like that. So I think it's important to not have a fear of failure, to question everything, provide access, and personally educate. Oh, the last thing I was going to say, networks. Because this industry, especially classical music, because that's what I live in, orchestra world, is so network-based, we have to increase our networks. Just personally, that's what I would say. That's one actually very large part of my job, and I can go into that later. But I always encourage, whether it's artist managers, whether it's artists, composers, whatever, conductors, to increase their networks, because that's how people get into this industry. And if we're not increasing our networks and our spaces and our communities and communicating, like Erin was saying, it's not going to change.
Thank you, Jen. So now going from the world of music, the musical arts, to the visual arts, Alex.
Well, thank you, Dr. Crutcher. For me, it's actually really simple. The idea and definition of who's our audience. Now, here in Virginia, our audience is everybody. And people, in fact, I had a consultant 15 years ago when I arrived, this marketing consultant from New York who had come in and was going to guide us through marketing and planning for the new facility, the new McLaughlin wing, and define how we're going to market. And he wanted to market narrow and deep. And I said, why would we do that? He said, well, because you don't have enough money to do anything else. I said, but that's not who we are. And he said, no, you have to do it. You have to go after. And then he used a word I had never heard before. And all I can tell you is it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. He said, no, you have to spend your time pursuing the persuadables. And I thought it was a dirty word, quite frankly, and I still do. And we had a large grant from Altria to support this 3-part project. We'd only gone through the first one. And I went to Altria and I said, can we change how we use this money? Because these folks do not know us and they don't know who we are. So I've made a career based on the fact that everyone, I will underline it, put it in bold, you can put it up in neon, everyone deserves to have art in their life. And it doesn't make a difference what your background is, your history, male or female, if you're born in a foreign country, if you're poor, if you're not, art is for everybody. And I have to tell you, I learned that from my parents who, my father was an immigrant, my mother I'm first generation. And, art was something that they appreciated, although they had no money and training in art. But they understood that going to an art museum, going to the symphony, going to the Rochester Philharmonic, making sure that we had all kinds of art in our lives, all of it basically informal, but also going down and enrolling to get a scholarship to go to summer classes at the museum, because it boils down to art is for everybody. So we at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts define our audience as everybody. We market to everybody. We design our programs to display the vast array across humankind's history, the last 6,000 to 7,000 years, which reflects our collection, and then building upon that diversity so that when you come to the museum, ours is what we think of as an encyclopedic collection, although, you know, if you think of an encyclopedia, we got a bunch of volumes missing, and we're always trying to fill those in. But Asia, Africa, Europe, the Pacific, the Americas, ancient all the way to contemporary. And we do that in order to be able to display the creative genius across these millennia. And it's about being able to walk into a museum and relate, regardless of who you are, what your background is, and where you've come from, or what training or no training you've had in appreciating art. It's about being able to relate. And that's why when you come to our museum, you know, great collections across the globe, contemporary, you know, a huge emphasis, particularly with our acquisitions, on African-American art, because it's one of the areas that traditionally, although we started early, did not do a great job. So when we want to assess our ability to gauge where we are, it is about how do we reflect Virginia? And that's all 8.5 million Virginians, everyone.
Thanks, Alex. Wes, your perspective as a graphic artist.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, one, I really appreciate being here and being part of this conversation and thinking about my practice, which is not necessarily exclusive to graphic design. It's very rare that I may even identify as a graphic designer, where I feel like a lot of my practice ends up in hybrid situations, what people understand as multidisciplinary, you know, ways of production. And what I've been able to develop is, or to think about is anti-disciplinary production. And thinking about anti-discipline as a way to break down hierarchies or traditional notions of making or understood ways of making. And so I think just being in that way of thinking about anti-discipline is a way to open up space for other practitioners or practitioners that don't get seen, identified, placed in museums, in programming and things like that. And I think one thing that has really been important to me, I feel like over the years of not just being a graphic designer, but in the realm of music, being a hip hop artist for a long time, is I'm really interested in the source of culture creation. And I feel like when we talk about diversity, inclusion, and all of these things, you know, there are communities that do get left out and are excluded, and we're trying to figure out how to include. But I would also argue that arts, creativity, and culture in general suffer when stories are not brought in, practitioners are not included in these stories. And I would say the fact that we've been struggling with these concepts and these ideas and working through this, I would say that culture has been starved due to the fact that we are just now trying to figure these things out. Or, you know, Dr. Crutcher, you know, you've been working on this for decades now, and just knowing that how I feel like it's a shame for everybody that certain practices, people, and exposure and people not being included has really just stifled the growth of creativity in general for, I would say, this planet. And so I'm always trying to figure this out because I think that's what's at stake. I think culture is a great thing, and culture should be maximized. And so I'm always figuring out how to maximize that. And I wanted to just say part of my approach, and one of my many approaches, is I'm always thinking about space where these different practices can happen unencumbered, or where like practitioners can work in a way where double consciousness is not at play, of thinking about where they come from and who they're trying to appeal to, and where decisions, the infrastructure, and any other things that go into the production and the proliferation of these thoughts and ideas and works can be done in less of a split conscious way. And so that, you know, I have many examples, but I'm always trying to figure out what is the space where those things can happen.
Thanks so much, Wes. So Stoner, what about the discipline of dance? One of my favorite artistic disciplines.
Well, that's thank you again for inviting me and for having all of us here. And Wes, your comments are sort of an interesting intro into me. I'm the artistic director of the Richmond Ballet, which is the state ballet of Virginia. And I'm sitting here thinking about it, and probably every single artistic director of any ballet company in the entire world started as a ballet dancer. There's really no way to start except to be a ballet dancer. And my story is kind of a typical one. You know, my mother took me at a very young age to ballet school. She was tall. She thought I would be tall. She wanted me to learn to stand up straight. It was on her list, like Girl Scouts and piano lessons and all of that. My mother was a first grade teacher. My father was a civil engineer. They were not interested particularly in the ballet, but I was from day one. What was interesting about me was I was interested in training and I was interested in performing, but almost immediately I was also interested in teaching and directing. I started a dancing school of my own in a neighbor's basement when I was 13. And when I was 15 and 16, I was already directing the Columbia City Ballet Apprentice Company. And as I think about my life as a director now, which I've been at the Richmond Ballet 41 years, because, you know, I was just saying I started young. I started when I was 2, of course. When I was directing the Columbia City Ballet Apprentice Company, I did my first full-length ballet, Snow White. And Jen, you'll love this. I listened to all the Peer Gynt lyric suites, Norwegian suites, and put together the music. And I had this very beautiful dancer who was 4 years junior to me that I wanted to put as the Queen of the Fairies in the scene where the stepmother threw Snow White out into the forest. And I got feedback from leadership at the Columbia City Ballet that that would not be appropriate casting because she was Black. And I was 16 years old and I looked at them and said, but I'm directing this and she's the right one for the part. She's the best. And I put her in it because she was the best. And she did a great job. And she later danced with Dance Theater of Harlem, and she's now co-director of the Ailey School. But that was just the beginning of a journey for me, realizing that I like to, in the dance world, there are lots of different voices. It's the people dancing on stage. And then they're the creative voices in terms of the choreographers and directors. And when I became director of the Richmond Ballet in 1980, I had 6 weeks to get up the Nutcracker. And I asked the faculty to send the best students. And I recruited the party scene parents. And when I got in there, I had Asian people and African-American people and white people. And I thought, okay, we'll just put them together in families and it just didn't cross my mind that the families were going to be mixed race or anything like that. This is the ballet after all. And I got all this positive feedback from the Richmond Free Press that I'd done this for some, proactive thing. And really at that point in my career, I was just using the best dancers for the best parts and trying to provide opportunity. In 1984, I founded the Richmond Ballet Professional Company, and we hired 12 dancers. 3 of those came from the School of Richmond Ballet. When you look back at the picture of it right now, out of the 3 that came from the School of Richmond Ballet, 2 of them were Black. And then 2 that I hired from the outside were Hispanic. So our first company was 4 out of 12 of people of color because they were good. And then as the company began to grow in the first 10 years, I realized, it dawned on me how incredibly valuable this was to have people on the stage that looked like the community, and how meaningful for that was for the audience, for the children in the school. And I realized how blessed I had been that my mother was inclined, picked up the phone and called me and registered me for ballet. But ballet's not on every family's landscape. So in 1994, 10 years into the professional mission, I founded the Minds in Motion program, which in my dream world will be in every single 4th grade classroom in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Before COVID, we were in 22 different schools, but we go into the schools, and it's based on blessed Jacques d'Amboise. I don't know if you all heard that he passed away day before yesterday, but his National Dance Institute program that he started when he left New York City Ballet in New York, where you take dance to the children. And through that program, at one point, we were serving 2,000 students a year, and then we make a path for them, if they're eager and interested, to come into the School of Richmond Ballet and be trained. We talk about it as children coming from inclined families and children coming from uninclined families, and how we merge those into one student body. And we've had 3 dancers in the professional company now that are alums of the Minds in Motion program. And it's become a real priority to reach out and find those students that may not have the opportunity I did, because it was on my mother's radar. Most of the time I've been director here, I've been one of 3 women artistic directors of major professional companies in the US. We've added a few lately. So in that way, I've been a minority. And I've tried, as in my programming, through my own choreography and hiring other women, hiring people of color, to work more and more to increase voice, not only with performers on stage, but also people creating work. And that's been an exciting evolution in what we're doing. A lot of people, in closing, I'll say, you know, when they think about ballet, they think about, you know, little girls in pink tutus. But when I think about ballet, I think of a language of movement that has crossed more cultures, more national borders than almost any. It was not invented on one person like Martha Graham or Jose Limon's body. It evolves with the times and can speak so powerfully with different performers and different choreographers and contemporary themes and contemporary music. And like I said, I've been doing this 40 years, but you can see I'm still so excited about it, what we can do for the community and the world through dance.
Wow. Thank you all. So I want to begin our discussion just by throwing out one question to you. And Wes went back to it. I mean, he mentioned that, you know, I've been speaking about these issues for more than 40 years in my career. And it's somewhat depressing to me that we're having this conversation today in 2021, but I'm being somewhat facetious when I say that, because you all have obviously you have done great work in your own spheres. But my question to you is this, you know, how can we in the United States, to begin with, that's where we are, but even in the world, how can we ensure that after you all are gone, have retired, gone on to other things, that we have young individuals who are being educated in the arts, who have the same passion for ensuring that they simply don't replicate the same story over and over and over again into the future, that they can actually produce more diverse works, bringing various art forms together to produce their works, and most importantly, appeal to a broad range of audiences. So I'm going to open that up. And, you know, just let me see your hand if you want to respond to that. Stoner.
I can respond to that because I'm so proud of this. For my 40th anniversary, even in the middle of COVID, what I really wanted, because I've been looking for an associate artistic director that could come in and work with me literally for decades. And I finally found a guy that I thought was the right one. I've worked with him as a freelance artist for 10 years. His name is Ma Kong, and he's Chinese, Chinese American now. He was in town last week, and I took him over to meet Alex and the curator of Chinese art at the Virginia Museum. And he is moving to Richmond, and he has the same passion that I do about dance. He studied Chinese folk dance and ballet at the Beijing Academy from the time he was 10 years old. And I think, particularly with a dance organization where the artist is the instrument and it's all humans. You know, we don't have paintings, we don't have scores, we just have human beings. I'm so committed before I leave here to passing the torch to the next generation in every department. I have a board member who's been on the board since 1957 when the Richmond Ballet was founded. I've worked with 16 board presidents while I've been here, and every one of them is still involved with the ballet in some way. And the investment of this community, those trustees, those artists that have helped me build this, I think can be ensured by casting the right people and bringing them along and taking that Olympic torch and passing it to the next person very carefully. At least that's my plan, Dr. Crutcher.
Thank you. Aaron.
Yeah, it's a, oh, sorry, just had my screen just went wild for a second. It's a tough thing because I think we have kind of two responsibilities related to this to make sure that next generation, right? I think one is that we have to leave them in an environment in which they can come into and be successful and feel welcome. And so I think we have to, while we're still in, knocking on wood, some of our roles, to do what we can to move the needle and continue to do that to the last hour that we're in our roles, or have the ability to bring about that change so that we leave behind a better place than we came into. And when I look back, 25 years ago, and the nature of conversations with orchestras, say, for example, or presenters or others, it was different. And so I feel like they will come into a better place, but we do have that responsibility. And then the second, I think, relates to our educational practices, that we embed in our curriculum aspects that incorporate DE&I, and that we don't look and say to a student who's learning about repertoire, well, yes, we learn about music history, and then if you want to learn about William Grant Still, you can take African-American music history or whatever, right? That, in other words, that people of color are not part of this, and obviously all education is, has to deal with this and address this. So, but I think the more we systemically make our curriculum more inclusive, then by definition, everyone, not just students of color, but all students will come out with the breadth of knowledge and understanding. Because one thing that, say, for example, orchestras face as they think about the fact that up until this past year, less than 1% of all of the works performed by all American orchestras were by any composer of color. So, right, and I'll just say that again, just so that everyone understands that we are not there yet. Less than 1% of all of the works performed by all American orchestras are by any composer of color. We don't have solid numbers yet from this past year. There has been a dramatic increase. So hopefully we will at least bridge the 1%, and that will build a trend. But there are a lot of orchestras who are well-meaning about this issue and want to address it, but they don't necessarily have the staffing who know that music. So if our curriculum reflected it, then all of those people who are coming up in that program staff will have the type of knowledge that Jennifer has, right? And that so many current leaders do, but we need to build that more systemically. And so I think it's both the curriculum and the platform we leave behind.
Jen.
I wanted to add, I spend a lot of time talking with young people in conservatories now, especially conservatories, but HBCUs and things like that, because I'm really interested in knowing what young people are thinking right now. I think it's about creating space. So I talk to arts leaders in the orchestral field about mentorship and making sure that they are actually creating space for people of color to get into the field, because gatekeeping is one huge issue in the classical orchestra world. It just is. And so nothing is going to change if we don't allow space for people to come in and follow. So I look at my role here as helping to create, like Aaron and Stoner were saying, helping to create an environment where these things are thought of, put some changes, some policy changes for the future, but I'm looking to create space for people to follow me. And how can I train them in what I do? And that's what I'm really interested in right now is, how to create more planners of color so that they do know these works. And because we do know these works, the William Grant Still didn't just pop up yesterday. So, and things like that. So I think it's important for people to acknowledge that gatekeeping has been a major thing in this industry, and that they need to create, if people don't want to move over, then create an opportunity later for someone.
Alex, thank you so much, Jen. I recall, I'm just going to put this out there, when my wife, Dr. Betty Mill Crutcher, and I first came to Richmond, we were invited out first by some friends and then by you and Catherine to the museum. And I remember distinctly the disconnect when I looked around. We went on a Thursday night, and I said to Betty, "Look at all the black people here." We had come from Boston, where we were members of the Museum of Fine Arts. You rarely saw any black people when you went to the Museum of Fine Arts, and here I am in Richmond, and there are these people all. And the young children too on that Friday when we had dinner with you, young children. So my question to you is, what are your thoughts about, you heard from Jen and Aaron and Stoner about the training in those areas. What about art, people in the art area? And I'm going to get to you, Russ, in a moment too. What can be done to ensure that young people interested in art history, when they're studying their courses, get a broader view, that they are not only kind of focused on a single story?
Well, it's a great question, and we spend a lot of time focusing on that very thing, and have for many years. And it's a complicated, interconnected system, because for us, to attract audience, you've got to have the collections, you got to have the exhibitions, but then you also have to have the authentic voices. We're going to open in a few short weeks an exhibition called The Dirty South. Doing an exhibition like that, which is all about 100-year swath of art, visual art, music, hip hop, coming out of the South, that would be difficult. First of all, obviously, most of the artists in the exhibition are African American. But having it curated by somebody who is from, and I hate to pick on a country, but from some European country, who's maybe very skilled and scholarly, but hasn't lived that experience, that's tough. That's why we have a Chinese curator of Chinese art that's born and raised in China. That's why when you want to have the authentic voices, you've got to have the collections, you got to have the exhibitions, and in our case, the staff. You look across our staff in terms of senior staff, our curators, and then also look at the boards. You can't institute change if you've got, in the case of Richmond, and no offense to the University of Richmond on the West End, but a white, rich West End board that is the traditional underpinning of art museums in America, and for that matter across the world. So you've got to change, and I go back to what I said originally. You have to reflect who we are, and who we are as Virginia and Virginians, with those 8.5 million people, us among them, and make sure that our collections, our boards, our staffs, our programs, our exhibitions, the people that are out in front of the public reflect who we are. And that's everybody: Native American, African American, Asian American, men, women, young, old. Our field, art museums, is really far behind, and not to pick on Boston, but I'm glad you said it. Most of my colleagues are only just now starting to see the light.
Thank you, and thank you so much, Alex. And what I'm getting to this point because I myself am an educator who's about to wind up my career as a president. But the concern is, it's great that you all are here. I mean, you all are great voices. You've been fantastic. You're doing great work. But I'm concerned about 50 years from now, being in a similar place to where we are now, where as opposed to moving forward. So, Wes, what are your perspectives? You're now a young professor, having you're a practicing artist. You do hip hop. I mean, and by the way, as an aside, a couple of weeks ago, I spoke to one of Aaron's students. When I say Aaron's students, a student from the University of Richmond, who's a University of Michigan, who's an opera singer, who wanted to talk to me about her interest in combining opera with hip hop, which I thought was fascinating. And the goal was to appeal to an audience of young people who would not normally go to the opera. So I'm curious, as an educator, Wes, and an artist, what are your thoughts with respect to preparing that next generation?
Yeah. I mean, I think, as many people have said, it's like multi-pronged in addressing these things, right? And I think even in people's individual missions, there are multiple things to consider and to take care of. And I think there are like 3 things that I think are really important that may all just kind of be mashed up in the one thing. But I think if we're talking about like future generations and like this idea of education, one thing that I believe is that there are better ideas for institutions out there in the minds and bodies of younger people. They already know what these better institutions are. And I would also say that our institutions have continuously failed in this mission. And I think there's good work happening, but I also think there's a slowness and an urgency that are not really working together right now. And if we can like get over this idea of urgency and still try new things, then I don't think I have the answers. I think somebody much younger than me has answers. So this goes to my other point where when we talk about access, I have this rule to myself that I think about, and it's in a very personal pedagogy, where I'm trying to hand over the keys to anything that I have as a resource to people as young as they can who would not have had that resource in the first place. And when I say hand the keys, that means I'm giving you the keys and I'm not monitoring, I'm not overlooking, I'm getting out of your way. You know, whether it be a building, whether it be, access to a network or funding. And I think the reason is because opportunities are overly monitored or surveilled by people are not trusted yet. I don't think this idea of diversity is even fully trusted. So I'm like, fail, I trust you to fail. But if you fail at a younger age, you will figure this out way earlier than me. And my hope is that you do figure this out way earlier than me so that there is hope. And that's kind of like how I think about this in a very like interpersonal, in a very interpersonal way. And just thinking like this idea of access and opportunity being more no strings attached so that new ideas can happen, but like really so failures can happen sooner and the stakes are lower when they happen.
Nice. So taking real chances too. Yeah, that's. I would be remiss if I didn't say that the Menuhin competition is in itself trying to model what it means not to adhere to a single story, Aaron. I mean, by having its competitors will be required to play a piece by Mason Bates, a contemporary composer who happens to be from Richmond. Also a piece that's done by a country fiddler that they'll be required to play. And then on the program we have Regina Carter, who's going to do a concert, the renowned jazz violinist. And then, of course, the Sphinx Virtuosi are also going to be performing. The magnificent Sphinx Virtuosi, made up a small chamber orchestra made up of Black and Latino string players. So that's all. And Mark O'Connor is the country violinist who's going to be performing and who has written a piece that the competitors will have to play. So they'll have to be very, very versatile, these violinists. And I think that's good for them. And remember, the violinists are as young as 11, all the way up to 22. So that's having an impression on them. We have just a few more minutes left, and I would love to hear just from each of you just a final word about your hopes for the future. That is, push back against me when I say 50 years, I'll be gone 50 years from now, but my grandchildren won't be in the same place that we are in today, where we see some progress, but as you heard from Aaron, there's still not many Black composers represented on orchestral programs. You don't see many people of color in orchestras. I mean, I think we're fortunate in Richmond to have the Richmond Ballet, the VMFA, the Richmond Symphony are taking a very different perspective. But what's your last word, your hopes and thoughts for the future? Just please. Wes.
I'll make this as quick as possible, but I think going back to what I was saying is I hope new rules are written, first of all, and that are expansive and generative. And the other thing is, I think for the next generation is this notion of being 2 times as good and getting half the results becomes eliminated immediately, or just even that perception for young Black and people of color and LGBTQ artists and creative people.
Thank you. Jen.
I hope 50 years from now that people in the orchestral world look at the orchestra as what it is, a group of musicians, not necessarily a type of music. I hope individual musicians grow up playing all types of music like I did, and go back to the times where, everybody improvised, composed, played all kinds of different music and whatever, and stopped being so small, in small, just classical only kind of thing. And I really hope that in the administrative world that orchestras are run by a group of diverse people, and who try different things and just are not doing it the way it's always been done. I mean, that's one of the biggest issues also in orchestras. We just haven't had, this is what's great about COVID. We've all had time to think about what we could do better, right? And I think orchestras are taking a deep dive into looking at contracts and the way they hire and they program and all these things that needed to be done a while ago. So I hope in 50 years that result has been, shown. So orchestras just look very different, but still provide a service.
Thank you, Jen.
Ron, I'll jump in for a quick second. The idea of 50 years from now, if we look 50 years back, we continue to make progress as institutions, as people, as a country, but it requires relentlessness. We've got to have a goal. We've got to have vision. We base everything on our strategic plan. So it can't be just, a nice wish. We have to have a very concrete idea of what the future should look like and has to look like. And then we have to articulate the plan to get there and then follow it religiously. And that will, because I'm not sure I'll be here 50 years from now either, it will ensure, for all the reasons that we've heard our colleagues just speak about, it'll ensure that we'll have made progress. I'd like to think we're going to get there wherever there is, but it is about the progression. And as long as we keep moving forward, I think that will be good for all of us.
So as the old spiritual says, we need to be able to see what the end will be, right? That's one of my favorite spirituals. Stoner or Aaron? Stoner?
It's shocking when you say 50 years from now. I'm sure I won't be here either. And 50 years sounds like such a long time. And yet I've admitted to all of you all on this call that I've been directing Richmond Ballet for 41 years. So when I look back to when I came and then I fast forward that amount forward, what's possible, I actually have a very full heart, because in my perfect world, 50 years from now, indeed, every elementary school child in the Commonwealth, in the world, would have dance the same as the way they have reading and math, and the arts would be part of what everybody has an exposure to. And then our art form of ballet, which I have such a broad definition of, if you think back to the Paris Opera, Giselle, and you think about Balanchine and Stravinsky, and then you think about the modern dance innovators and the cross-pollination with ballet, and you think about Levi Marsman here right now doing a new piece for the Richmond Ballet. As more people from more different cultures and races train, then they'll be like me, because you have to train to be able to be a director and a choreographer. And then they'll be able to use that language of movement to say whatever they want to say about now. And the dancer population will be completely different when everyone has access to learn the beauty of dance. And I'm hopeful when I think about how it was 41 years ago. And I think they're good people that are inspired to do this now. Please, 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 because it's time.
Thanks so much, Stoner. And Aaron, last word.
Yeah, well, 50 years, I've been celebrating my 50th birthday here during this past year of COVID. So I'm hoping to barely be around in the next 50. And hopefully, if I can have a great disciplined workout routine like you, President Crutcher, you are my idol. And so there is, I think, a sense that I hope in 50 years, Sphinx is celebrating its 25th anniversary this next year. In 50 years, so 2 times as much, my hope is that Sphinx looks at all of its kind of advocacy type of work and says it's actually not necessary, that it's really now about just celebrating the diversity that exists rather than fighting so that diversity can exist. And that it becomes more of a celebratory organization rather than a social justice organization, because justice has actually been achieved.
Wow, what a way to end. Fantastic. And you all were a magnificent panel. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this. And for our audience, thank you for tuning in to this session. We're about halfway through the Menuhin competition right now. This evening at 7:30, you can watch the junior finals or the junior semifinals. And please go on to the website, menuhincompetition.org. Look at the remainder of the schedule. We're going from now through May 23rd to see what amazing events you will be able to participate in. Let me end now by thanking Wes, Alex, Aaron, Jen, and Stoner so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to be with us. You're all a real inspiration, and I can't thank you enough for your agreeing to do this. So take care.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
You for all you've done for this community and your time here, including bringing this competition here. And we're just so grateful to have you here with us, and glad you're staying even after you retire as president.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone. And be sure to go to that website and look at the other events. Bye-bye.